You now have everything you need to save money on SaaS. You know which tools are being used and which are collecting dust. You know what pricing model you're on and whether it's the right one. You know when your vendor is under pressure and what levers move the number. What you don't have yet is a plan. And without a plan, that knowledge sits in a spreadsheet. It doesn't translate into savings. It doesn't change a single contract. This episode is the plan. We're going to take everything from episodes 2, 3, and 4, the vendor intelligence, the pricing models, the license audit, and turn it into a concrete negotiation strategy. Step by step, decision by decision. By the end of this episode, you will know exactly which tools to close, which to keep, which to scale, and, most importantly, when and how to act on each one. Let's start. Quick recap before we build the strategy. Episode 2 was about vendor intelligence, when to buy and why timing is the single biggest lever in any SaaS negotiation. We covered vendor growth stages, what metric your vendor is optimizing for at each phase, and how their fiscal calendar creates predictable pressure windows you can align your renewals to. Episode 3 was about pricing models, pay as you go, flat rate, monthly active users, per fiat. Each model has a correct application and a set of contract levers that protect you within it. The wrong model, even perfectly negotiated, generates structural waste from day one. Episode 4 was the license audit. How to find every tool in your environment, measure actual usage against contracted licenses, and categorize what you have. That audit is the foundation everything else is built on. If you haven't watched those 3 episodes, pause here and go back. What follows assumes you have the audit data in front of you. If you do, let's build the strategy. The first step is to make a decision about every tool in your environment. Not a vague intention, a concrete status. One of 4 outcomes: close, keep and downscale, keep and reduce, or keep and scale. Think of this as a decision matrix. Every tool gets assigned a status based on 3 criteria: usage, pricing model fit, and strategic alignment. Let me walk through each status. Status 1, close. These are tools that need to exit your environment. There are 4 reasons a tool ends up here. The first is duplication. You identified overlapping tools in episode 4. 2 tools doing the same job is 1 tool too many. The cheaper, better integrated one stays. The other closes. The second is pricing model misalignment. The tool itself may be fine, but the commercial model is structurally wrong for how you use it. A consumption-based tool where your usage is now stable and predictable. A per-seat contract with a 15% reassignment cap when your attrition runs at 25%. The model is generating waste by design, and the vendor won't renegotiate it. Close. The third is technology misalignment. Your vendor has stopped developing the product. No meaningful roadmap updates in 18 months. Competitors have moved to a new architecture, AI native, API first, whatever the shift is in your category. This tool is heading toward legacy status. It's not a question of if you'll replace it, it's a question of whether you manage the transition on your terms or scramble when the tool finally fails you. Close on your timeline. The fourth is compliance or security. The tool doesn't meet your current data residency, security certification, or regulatory requirements. This is non-negotiable. Close. One important note on closing tools. It is almost never simple. Closing a tool means migrating users, extracting data, rebuilding integrations. In the case of duplicate tools, the destination already exists. Users move to the surviving platform. In all other cases, you need a replacement onboarded before you can close the original. We'll cover onboarding and migration in a dedicated episode. It's a topic that deserves its own treatment. Status 2. Keep and downscale. These tools stay, but with fewer users. The tool delivers real value to a specific group. Removing it entirely would hurt them. But broad access across the organization is generating cost without generating value. The clearest example, professional design software. For your design team, it's a must-have. For the 200 other employees who have access and log in twice a year, It's an expensive license sitting idle. You keep the tool. You restrict access to the users who actually need it. A second example, a tool with a structurally unfavorable pricing model, but where the migration cost of moving the remaining active users is higher than the waste generated by the excess licenses. You keep it. You downscale to active users only. You park it until the next renewal creates a better exit window. Downscale is a quantitative decision. You are reducing the number of licenses or seats. Status 3, keep and reduce. These tools stay, but in a smaller configuration. The distinction from downscale is important. Reduce is qualitative, not quantitative. You are not cutting users. You are cutting what those users have access to. This is the tool where adoption is the problem. Users have access to the enterprise tier with 20 modules. They actively use 3. The remaining 17 generate 0 value but cost you the difference between the business and enterprise price point. Your move, negotiate down to the business tier. Or remove the unused modules, same users, smaller footprint, lower cost. A second scenario for reduce, a tool where you're paying for capacity you'll never use. Storage limits, API call allowances, support tiers. You are paying for an enterprise SLA when your actual usage never triggers it. Negotiate down to a tier that reflects genuine consumption. Status 4, keep and scale. These are your strategic tools. They meet your security and compliance requirements. They have a favorable pricing model, typically flat rate, which means scaling users costs you nothing at the margin. And they have genuine potential to expand across the organization. The classic examples in most tech environments: whiteboarding tools, project and task management platforms, documentation tools. These have flat-rate economics, high collaboration value, and grow more useful as more people use them. Your strategy here is the opposite of downscale. You want adoption to increase. More users, more workflows, deeper embedding. These tools become harder to displace as they scale, which is exactly what you want from a strategic platform. Now you have your matrix. Every tool in your environment has a status. This is your target state. The gap between your current state and your target state is your roadmap. Having a target state is not enough. You need to know when you can act on it. This is where your contract data becomes as important as your usage data. For every tool in your environment, you need 3 dates. The first is the Tacit Renewal Date. This is the deadline by which you must notify the vendor if you intend to change or cancel the contract. Miss this date and the contract auto-renews, typically for another full term, at the same price, with the same structure. Most organizations miss this date consistently. It is the single most expensive calendar failure in SaaS procurement. The Tacit Renewal Date is usually 60 to 90 days before the contract end date. It is buried in your MSA. Find it, put it in your procurement calendar with a 90-day warning before the warning date. The second is the renewal date. This is when the contract actually expires. After the Tacit Renewal Date has passed, you can no longer exit cleanly, but you can still negotiate reductions. Seat count, module access, pricing tier. You cannot walk away, but you can right-size. The third is what I call the migration readiness date. Working backwards from your renewal date, how long does your technical team need to migrate users, extract data, and decommission the tool? For a simple tool with low user count and no integrations, 60 days may be enough. For a complex platform with deep integrations and significant historical data, you may need 6 months or more. Your migration readiness date tells you the latest point at which your technical teams must begin migration work. If that date falls before your Tacit Renewal Date, you have a clean exit. If it falls after, you need to start the technical work before you've formally notified the vendor. That is manageable, but it requires coordination. One contract term worth adding at every future renewal, a data retention clause. Negotiate the right to access your data in the vendor's system for 60 to 90 days after contract termination, at no additional cost. Without this clause, the vendor can delete your data on the day the contract ends. With it, your technical teams have a buffer to complete extraction even if the migration runs slightly over schedule. Most vendors will agree to this. It costs them almost nothing, and it's a legitimate ask. Now map your tools against these 3 dates. What you are looking for is the sequence. Which tools have tacit renewal dates in the next 90 days? Those require immediate action. Which tools have renewals in 6 to 12 months? Those give you time to prepare. Which tools are mid-contract with no near-term leverage point? Those go on a watch list for the next renewal cycle. This sequence is your action plan. Not everything happens at once, but everything has a date. You now have 2 things: a target state for every tool and a timeline for when you can act on each one. The final step before you enter any vendor conversation is matching those 2 inputs to a negotiation approach. The approach depends on 3 variables: what you want to achieve, what contractual rights you currently have, and what leverage you carry into the conversation. Let me walk through the framework. If a tool is marked close, your approach depends entirely on what your contract allows. If you have a termination for convenience clause, the mechanics are straightforward. You serve notice within the required window, typically 90 days, and you specify the termination date. One important point: the termination date you specify should be your migration readiness date, not the minimum contractual date. If your technical team needs 120 days to complete migration safely, serve notice with a 120-day termination date. Do not let the contractual minimum push you into a timeline your team cannot execute. If you do not have termination for convenience, you have 2 paths. The first is SLA review. Most procurement teams never audit SLA performance. They should. Pull the vendor's uptime and response time records for the last 12 months against their contractual commitments. If there are breaches, and there frequently are, you have grounds to invoke the breach of contract clause. The vendor will typically have 30 days to remediate. If the breach is material and documented, your legal team can use this to support an early exit. Engage legal early on this path. It requires precision. The second path is deliberate shelfware. This is a tactic, not a strategy, and I want to be direct about what it involves. You stop providing users access to the tool while continuing to pay the license fee. You simultaneously onboard users to a replacement. The economics only work in one specific scenario, where the tool has a mixed license plus consumption model, and the consumption component is generating significant overage costs. By removing access, you eliminate the consumption charges. You pay only the base license. The combined cost of the base license plus the new replacement tool is lower than the previous total cost, including overages. This is a legitimate financial decision, but it requires honesty about what you're doing. You are paying for something you are not using deliberately to avoid higher costs while you complete a transition. It should be time-bounded and documented internally, and it should only be used when the numbers clearly support it. If a tool is marked keep and downscale or keep and reduce, your approach is a reduction negotiation. You are not threatening to leave. You are presenting your usage data, which you collected in episode 4, and requesting a commercial structure that reflects actual consumption. The audit data is your evidence. The pricing model knowledge from episode 3 tells you what to ask for. The timing knowledge from episode 2 tells you when to ask. If a tool is marked keep and scale, your approach is an expansion negotiation. This is often the most overlooked conversation in SaaS procurement. Organizations spend significant energy on cost reduction and almost none on negotiating better terms for tools they plan to grow. If you are moving a tool from 200 users to 800 users over the next 18 months, that is significant ARR growth for the vendor. They should be competing for that commitment with better pricing, not billing you at the standard list rate as you scale. Approach your scale tools with a growth commitment. Here is where we are today. Here is where we plan to be in 18 months. What does a multi-year agreement look like that reflects that trajectory? The vendor who understands their own ARR metrics, which you now understand from episode 2, will engage with this conversation seriously. Let me pull this together. A SaaS negotiation strategy is not a single conversation with a single vendor. It is a coordinated program across your entire software portfolio, sequenced against contract dates, anchored in usage data, and matched to the commercial structure of each tool. The 4 steps are these. First, assign every tool a status. Close, downscale, reduce, or scale. This is your target state. Second, map every tool to its contract timeline. Tacit renewal, date, renewal date, migration readiness date. This is your action sequence. Third, match each tool's status to the appropriate negotiation approach. Termination, reduction, or expansion, and the contractual rights that determine which path is available to you. Fourth, sequence your actions. Not everything happens at once. The tools with the nearest tacit renewal dates move first. Everything else is staged behind them. That is the plan. Free CFO Procurement Toolkit, Vendor Scorecard, Renewal Checklist, and the PDF Guide. Link is in the description. Subscribe if this is useful. See you in the next episode.